Have you ever felt that shiver down your spine, that sense of being watched, even when you're completely alone? It's that prickling feeling, the one that makes you look over your shoulder, just to be sure. Now imagine that feeling isn't just in one room or one shadow. Imagine it surrounds you, filling every single corner, pressing in from all sides, relentless. They say that somewhere, hidden between the folds of our world, there's a place that doesn't follow the rules we know. It's not meant to be seen, not meant to be touched. And yet, some people stumble into it without even realizing it. They call it the Backrooms, a name whispered in fear, a space described in fragments and rumors, as if even speaking of it too much could draw it closer. The Backrooms, they stretch on for miles. Endless corridors that repeat, each hallway blending into the next, like a maze designed to trap the mind. You could walk forever and never find the way out. Some say the walls have a kind of faded yellow, like they were once bright, full of life. But now, they're just hollow, with stains that make you wonder what happened here. What left its mark on these walls? People who find themselves there say the silence is the worst part. It's not a comforting silence, it's oppressive. The kind that sinks into your bones, makes your skin prickle. Every sound you make seems too loud, echoing endlessly, and sometimes, if you listen close enough, there are other sounds. Faint, distant, as if someone or something is just out of sight. They call it an endless maze, but it's more than that. It's as if the space itself is aware. Every twist and turn feels calculated, each dead end like a cruel joke, mocking you as you desperately try to find an exit that isn't there. And the lights, those harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights that hang from the ceiling, they flicker, just enough to make you think the shadows are moving. You see, the Backrooms aren't just empty. They're waiting, and they're patient. As you wander deeper, the sense of being watched only grows. At first it's just a faint whisper, a shiver down your spine, but then it starts to take shape. You hear things, whispers just on the edge of hearing, footsteps that don't belong to you, moving in rhythm with yours. And sometimes you'll catch a glimpse of something just out of sight in the corner of your eye. But when you turn, there's nothing there. Or maybe there is, but it's hiding, waiting for you to let your guard down. And those who've been there, they say the Backrooms change you. You start to lose track of time. Hours blur together. Days slip by without any sign of daylight. And soon it isn't just the corridors and the lights that feel off. It's you. You start to feel different. Detached. Like the space is pulling pieces of you away, bit by bit, until you're just another shadow wandering those endless halls. Some say the Backrooms are alive. They say it has rules of its own, rules that we can't understand. And those who try to escape, well, they often find themselves back where they started, no matter how many turns they take. Every door, every exit, it's an illusion. A trap designed to keep you there forever. But the worst part isn't the silence or the shadows that move when you're not looking. It's the feeling that you're not alone. That, somewhere in that endless expanse of walls and corridors, there's something else. Something that's always a few steps behind, following you, studying you. They say if you're quiet enough, if you hold your breath and really listen, you can hear it breathing, waiting for you to slip just once. You see, the Backrooms don't just trap you, they consume you. With each passing hour, you feel yourself slipping further into their grasp, your thoughts unraveling, your will breaking. And in the end, you're no longer trying to escape. You're just wandering aimless, a part of the endless silence, another echo lost in the void. So, if you ever find yourself in that space, that place that shouldn't exist, remember this. You're not the first to wander those halls, and you won't be the last. It started as curiosity. You know, the kind, that gnawing need to know what lies behind locked doors and broken windows, what stories the abandoned places of the world hold. For most people, it's a passing thought, nothing more. But some of us can't let it go. And that's what led him there. He'd heard rumors, whispers of a hidden world, the kind of place that isn't marked on any map, that no one could find even if they tried. Some called it a myth, a campfire tale meant to scare off thrill seekers. But he was different. He needed to see for himself. It was an ordinary building, tucked away at the edge of town. Its walls were cracked and faded, a skeleton of what it once was. But there was something about it, something that pulled him in. Maybe it was the stillness, or the way the windows stared back like empty eyes. Or maybe it was something deeper, a feeling, an instinct. He'd heard that people sometimes vanished there, though no one could say where they went. But that only intrigued him more. Against every warning, he stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty hall. If he'd known what was waiting, maybe he would have turned back. Maybe he would have listened to that shiver of fear creeping up his spine. But by the time he realized he'd made a mistake, it was too late. One step led to another, down darkened hallways and empty rooms, each one the same as the last. And then the walls shifted. The world around him stretched, twisted, as if reality itself was fraying at the edges. He wasn't in the building anymore. He was somewhere else. Somewhere that shouldn't exist. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Thick, stale air that clung to his throat, almost suffocating. It smelled of old paper and mildew, as if no one had breathed there for years or centuries. The walls around him were yellowed, stained with a sickly, faded hue. It was like stepping into a forgotten dream, one that had soured over time. He reached out to touch the walls, but they were damp, almost as if they were breathing with him, pulsing with a life of their own. Above him, fluorescent lights hummed, casting an uneven, flickering glow. Shadows danced across the walls, twisting with each pulse of light, almost as if they were hiding something, or someone. He tried to shake it off, but he couldn't ignore it, the feeling that something was just out of sight, hiding in every darkened corner. Every shadow seemed to stretch, reaching out, beckoning him to look closer. And then there was the hum. At first he thought it was just the lights, but as he walked, the sound followed, growing louder, shifting. It wasn't a mechanical hum, it was too uneven, too alive. It throbbed, as though coming from the walls themselves, pulsing with a rhythm that didn't match his own. He held his breath, straining to listen, and for a moment he could swear he heard something beneath the hum. A whisper, just soft enough to make him doubt himself. But the longer he listened, the clearer it became. As he continued listening, the whispers grew louder, mingling with the hum. Faint voices just out of reach. He stopped, trying to convince himself it was nothing, just his mind playing tricks. But then he heard footsteps. Soft, barely audible, echoing just a few paces behind him. He froze, his heart pounding, and turned, but the corridor was empty. The walls stretched endlessly, disappearing into darkness. He waited, straining to hear, but the footsteps had stopped, or so he thought. Just as he started to move again, he heard it, his name, spoken softly, as if from the walls themselves. He froze, the air thick around him, and for a moment he thought he was losing his mind. No one knew he was here. No one should have known his name. But there it was, whispered in a voice that was almost familiar, and yet completely wrong. He turned again, his eyes searching the shadows, but there was nothing. Just that endless, sickly yellow hallway, stretching on. And that's when he saw them. Etched into the walls, faint symbols he hadn't noticed before. Strange shapes, almost like letters, carved into the yellowed wallpaper, some faded, others fresh. They looked ancient, primal, as if they'd been left there by someone, or something, that had come before him. He ran his fingers over them, feeling the rough texture under his skin. They felt like warnings, silent messages from those who'd been trapped here long ago. As he continued, the symbols grew more frequent, covering the walls like a map or a curse. And with each one he passed, the whispers grew louder, filling the silence, weaving into a chorus of voices that seemed to echo from every corner of the maze. They weren't words he could understand, but he felt their meaning, a sense of desperation, of fear, as if the walls themselves were crying out, begging him to turn back. But there was no way back. Every path led only deeper into the unknown. He quickened his pace, hoping to escape the voices, but the footsteps returned, matching his own. Every turn he took led him to another corridor, another dead end, and each one was marked with those same symbols, growing darker, more frenzied. It was as though the walls were closing in, trapping him, pushing him further into the heart of the labyrinth. And still, the whispers followed. He stopped again, listening, and this time the voices were clearer. They didn't just whisper, they were calling, as if reaching out to him, pleading for help or warning him. He pressed himself against the wall, his heart racing. But then he heard it. A voice, low and guttural, whispered from behind him. A single, haunting word. It said, "Stay." In that moment he knew he wasn't alone. Whatever was in the backrooms wasn't just watching, It was following, waiting for him to slip, to let his guard down. He ran, his footsteps echoing, the walls seeming to shift and close in, but no matter how far he went, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was right behind him, just beyond the light. He glanced back, only to find the corridor empty, but then he noticed a shadow flickering at the edge of his vision, something dark and silent, just barely out of sight. He turned, but it was gone, and yet he knew it was still there, waiting. He realized, then, that escape was never an option. The backrooms weren't just a maze. They were a trap designed to catch those who wandered too far. And as he stood there, heart pounding, he finally understood he was being hunted. Time slipped away from him, fading into the background like a distant memory. It was as if the backrooms had swallowed time itself, leaving him suspended in a perpetual now. He couldn't tell how long he had been wandering those endless corridors, minutes, hours, days, it all blended together. His watch had stopped ticking, frozen in a moment that felt as distant as a forgotten dream. But the further he went, the more he could feel it. Something was wrong. Off. As though he'd crossed into a place where time held no power, where it was trapped just like he was. And with each step, the feeling grew stronger, a quiet dread settling over him like a shadow. He felt it before he saw it, a shiver down his spine, as if an icy hand had brushed against his skin. It didn't make sense. The air was still, stagnant, heavy with the scent of mildew and old, decaying paper. But the chill lingered, prickling his skin, making his hand shake. He swallowed hard, his breath catching in his throat, and for the first time he felt a flicker of real fear. He was not alone. Every instinct told him to turn back, to leave this place and never return. But there was no way back. Every corridor looked the same. Every wall faded with the same sickly yellow. He moved forward, his footsteps echoing in the silence, each sound too loud, too sharp, cutting through the stillness like a knife. And that's when he began to see them things left behind, scattered across the floor as if marking a path. The first relic he found was a torn jacket, faded and worn, lying half buried in the carpet as if abandoned in haste. He picked it up, feeling the stiff fabric, the weight of years trapped within its threads. It was cold to the touch, too cold, as though it had absorbed the chill of this place. And as he held it, a sense of unease crept over him, a feeling that whoever had worn this jacket had never left. He dropped the jacket, letting it fall back to the floor. But his eyes caught on something else just a few steps away, a broken compass, its glass cracked, the needle spinning slowly, aimlessly, pointing nowhere. He picked it up, watching as the needle jerked and twitched, as if trying to find some direction in a place where none existed. It was useless, a silent testament to the hopelessness of those who had come before him. And as he turned it over in his hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was following their path, a path that led only deeper. As he continued, he found more signs, each one more unsettling than the last. A single shoe, small and worn, its laces frayed, lying abandoned in the middle of the corridor, a crumpled piece of paper with faded ink, the words too blurred to read but hauntingly familiar, a flashlight, its bulb shattered, its battery long dead. Each item felt like a whisper from those who had wandered these halls, a silent echo of lives lost, of stories cut short. It was as if the backrooms were a graveyard, a place where people left pieces of themselves behind, slowly becoming part of the walls. Each relic felt like a reminder, a warning from those who had come before, who had tried to escape and failed. He felt their presence, lingering in the silence, pressing in from every side, a crowd of invisible eyes watching his every move. And with each step he felt himself slipping further into their grasp, becoming just another ghost in this endless as forsaken place. As he moved deeper, the silence seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on him like a weight, muffling even the sound of his own footsteps. And then he heard it, a low, distant murmur, drifting through the corridors like smoke, too faint to understand but impossible to ignore. He stopped, straining to listen, his heart pounding, but the sound was elusive, slipping through his mind like a forgotten memory. It was a voice, or maybe voices, blending together in a haunting, discordant chorus. He tried to shake it off, to tell himself it was just his imagination, but the sound followed him, growing louder with each step. He turned a corner, and there, at the end of the hallway, he saw it. A shadow, barely visible in the dim light, standing perfectly still. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched him with eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness, cold and unblinking, piercing through him as though it could see into his very soul. It was like staring into a void, but the void was staring back. His heart raced, his body frozen in place, as if those eyes held him captive, as if they were a command, a silent, unspoken warning. He couldn't look away, couldn't move, trapped in the gaze of something ancient, something that didn't belong in this world. He felt its presence, cold and dark, seeping into his bones, a chill that sank deep into his skin, making him feel small, insignificant, a mere flicker of life in the vast emptiness of this place. He tried to take a step back, to turn, to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. It was as if the very walls were holding him in place, trapping him in that moment, binding him to that gaze. He wanted to scream, to break the silence, but no sound escaped his lips. And then, slowly, the shadow shifted, its eyes narrowing, as though it was sizing him up, deciding whether or not to let him go. In that moment, he knew with a terrible, unshakable certainty that this was not just a place. The backrooms were alive, filled with things that watched and waited, things that fed off fear, that thrived in the silence. And whatever he was staring at, it was one of them. An entity, something ancient and forgotten. A being of darkness and cold that had made these halls its home, that lived and breathed within the walls, hiding in every shadow, waiting for lost souls like him to stumble into its domain. Finally, he managed to break free, his legs moving of their own accord, carrying him down the corridor, his footsteps echoing in the silence. But as he ran, he could feel its eyes boring into his back, its presence pressing on him like a weight. He turned corner after corner, but no matter how far he went, he couldn't escape the sense of being hunted. He knew he couldn't stop, knowing that if he did, he would never leave this place. He would become just another shadow, another relic left behind, another silent scream lost in the endless suffocating silence of the backrooms. They say there's something hidden here in the backrooms, something older than the walls themselves. Maybe it's a secret, buried in these endless corridors, a truth that no one's meant to know. Maybe that's why people disappear. You've heard the stories, haven't you? People who wander too far, who take one wrong step and never come back. But what I found here, what I stumbled upon, was beyond anything I could have imagined. It was just a whisper at first, a rumor about the backrooms and the things that dwell there, that somewhere, buried in the heart of this endless maze, there's a place no one's meant to find. They say it holds the reason why this place exists, a clue to why these walls never end, why they trap people here, make them vanish as if they'd never existed. Some say it's a portal to something else, something darker, something ancient that has always been here, hidden just out of sight. As I walked, those thoughts clawed at the back of my mind, a nagging question that grew louder with each step. What if there really was something deeper here, something the backrooms were hiding? What if this place had a purpose, a reason, a hidden truth that would explain everything? But the further I went, the more I realized, some secrets aren't meant to be uncovered. And some places hold truths too terrible to know. Imagine it was you, trapped in this maze of endless corridors, with shadows that follow your every move, whispers that seem to come from the walls themselves. Imagine knowing that with every step, you're moving closer to something you can't understand, something that might just be watching you from the darkness. Would you keep going? Would you keep searching for a way out, or would you turn back? Think about it. Every turn you take, every hallway you step into, there's the chance that something is waiting just out of sight, something that knows you're there, that's been waiting for you all along. And as you press forward, with nothing but the flickering lights and the echo of your own footsteps, you start to realize you're not alone. So I have to ask you, if you were here, if you were trapped in the backrooms, would you keep searching, or would you try to escape? Because the truth is, once you're in, the backrooms never let you go. And the question isn't if you'll find a way out, but if you'll ever be the same again. He stumbled forward, exhaustion weighing down every step. His mind was clouded, his vision blurred, but then he saw it. A door, dark and weathered, standing at the end of the hall where moments before there had been only an endless stretch of yellowed walls. His heart skipped a beat, a flicker of hope piercing the crushing dread. Could this be it? The way out? He approached slowly, as if afraid that any sudden movement might make the door vanish. His hand trembled as he reached for the handle, fingers closing around the cold metal. He hesitated, the silence pressing down on him like a weight, every instinct screaming at him to turn back, to run. But there was nowhere else to go. With a deep breath, he twisted the handle and stepped through. But as soon as he stepped over the threshold, something felt wrong. The air was colder, the silence deeper, a heavy stillness that seemed to press in from every side. He looked around, his eyes adjusting to the dim light, and that's when he saw it. The walls, they were the same. The same faded yellow, the same flickering lights casting twisted shadows. He wasn't outside. He was back where he'd started, trapped in the endless maze of corridors. Panic gripped him, his breaths coming fast and shallow, his heart pounding in his chest like a trapped animal. He spun around, searching for the door, the exit he'd just stepped through, but it was gone. Just a blank wall staring back at him, mocking him, trapping him. And that's when he heard it. A soft sound, barely more than a whisper, footsteps. But they weren't his. He froze, his ears straining in the silence, listening, hoping he'd imagined it. But the sound came again, soft and measured, perfectly in sync with his own heartbeat. He took a hesitant step forward, and heard it again. Another step, barely a beat behind his, as if someone or something was mirroring his movements. The sound was soft, almost gentle, like a shadow slipping across the floor, but there was no mistaking it. He took another step, and again, the sound echoed, a perfect mimicry of his own. It was there, just out of sight, following him, matching his every movement, lurking in the shadows. He couldn't see it, couldn't hear anything but the quiet rhythm of its footsteps, but he could feel it. A presence pressing in from behind, a darkness creeping closer with every step. And then, he heard it, a low, guttural breathing, just behind him, so close he could feel the chill of it on the back of his neck. He didn't dare turn, didn't dare move, his entire body frozen in terror, but the breathing continued, soft and shallow, each exhale brushing against his skin, a cold reminder that he was not alone. His hands shook, his breaths coming in short, panic gasps, but the stalker stayed hidden, lurking just out of sight, waiting, watching. He tried to move, to take another step, hoping the sound would fade, that he could outrun it, but with every step, the sound followed, closer, tighter, as if the shadows themselves were alive, as if the walls were bending to let the stalker follow his every move. He turned, his eyes darting through the dim light, but all he could see were shadows, shifting and twisting, stretching toward him like hands reaching out from the darkness. It was then he realized the truth. These things, these shadows, they were stalkers, creatures that had made this place their home, that had been watching him from the moment he'd stepped into the backrooms. They were patient, following him, learning his movements, waiting for him to let his guard down. And now they were close. So close he could almost feel their presence, feel their cold eyes watching him, and feel their hands reaching out to pull him deeper into their world. He started to run again, his footsteps echoing in the silence. But no matter how fast he went, no matter how many corners he turned, the stalkers followed, their footsteps softer but perfectly in sync, never more than a heartbeat behind. His mind was unraveling, fear clawing at his every thought, but there was no escape. The walls shifted, the shadows stretched, and with every turn he could feel them drawing closer, their breathing louder, their eyes piercing through the darkness. And in that moment I understood. The backrooms weren't just a place, they were alive. A living, breathing nightmare that fed on the lost, that trapped souls in its endless corridors, twisting them, consuming them, turning them into shadows. And the stalkers, they weren't just following me. They were leading me deeper, guiding me into the heart of the darkness, where there was no escape, where fear became all-consuming, eternal. He tried to remember why he'd come here, why he'd chosen to wander into these abandoned spaces, to chase rumors and myths about hidden places and lost souls. It had all started with that craving for something more, something beyond the mundane, the ordinary. He'd wanted an adventure, something that would break the monotony of his life, give him a story to tell. But now he wasn't so sure. The thrill had faded, replaced by a bone-deep fear, a desperation that clawed at him from the inside. Every turn, every dead end felt like a punishment, a reminder of his own foolishness. He'd walked into the backrooms, driven by a need to escape his ordinary life, but this wasn't the escape he'd imagined. The thrill of adventure had turned sour, twisted into a nightmare that held him captive, dragging him deeper with each step. All he wanted now was to leave, to be free of these walls, these endless, echoing halls. But he knew, deep down, that the Backrooms had no intention of letting him go. It was then, in that silence, that he began to feel the weight of isolation settling in, pressing against his chest. It wasn't just loneliness, it was a deeper, darker kind of solitude, one that left him feeling hollow, as though the walls themselves were feeding off his fear, his desperation. He was alone in a way he'd never been before, cut off from the world, from everything he knew. And the worst part was knowing that no one would ever find him. He could scream, he could cry out, but there was no one there, no one to hear him. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone. It was funny, really, in a dark sort of way. He'd come here looking for something extraordinary, something to break the monotony, to shake him out of the ordinary. Life had become a blur of routines, of quiet frustrations, of days blending into each other. And somewhere along the line he'd started feeling trapped, like he was stuck in a loop, living the same day over and over again, with no end in sight. He'd thought that exploring abandoned spaces, diving into forgotten corners of the world, might give him the escape he needed, a story worth telling. But he hadn't bargained for this. He hadn't expected to find a place that was as empty, as hollow as he felt. And now, as he wandered these corridors, chased by shadows, surrounded by silence, he realized the cruel irony of it all. He'd wanted to escape his own life, his own mind, and now he was trapped in a place that was nothing but endless corridors and empty rooms, a prison made of silence and darkness. He was no longer looking for an adventure, no longer searching for something extraordinary. All he wanted was a way out, a way back to the life he'd once wanted to escape. The irony was bitter, like ash on his tongue. He'd traded one prison for another, one that was far darker, far more terrifying. And as he walked, he couldn't help but wonder if this was what he'd been running from all along, his own loneliness, his own fear, magnified 1,000 times over in the empty halls of the Backrooms. In that instant, he realized it wasn't the stalkers that terrified him most, or the endless corridors that twisted and stretched beyond reason. It was the silence, the feeling of being utterly alone, lost in a place that seemed to devour time and memory. There was no comfort, no warmth, nothing to anchor him, and that emptiness, it was like staring into a void, a reminder of his own fears, his own regrets, his own need for something he could never have. He wanted to tell himself it would be over soon, that he'd find a way out, that this nightmare would end. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was already part of this place, that the Backrooms had claimed him, taken something from him that he'd never get back. And as he walked, as the shadows closed in, he couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, he'd been meant to find this place all along. The corridors stretched before him, endless and unchanging, each turn blending into the next. But he could feel it now, the sense of something closer, something watching him with a focus that felt almost tangible. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down like a weight he couldn't shake. Every corner, every shadow seemed to move, to twist, as if guiding him, forcing him forward, closer to something he couldn't yet see. And then he felt it, a presence close behind, so close he could almost feel the chill radiating from it. His breaths came faster, each one louder, echoing in the silence. He turned, slowly, his heart pounding, and there it was. A stalker. A shadowy figure, standing only a few steps away, its form barely visible in the dim light, a dark outline against the endless, faded walls. It didn't move, didn't breathe, but its eyes, they gleamed cold and empty, staring right through him. He took a step back, and it matched him, moving in perfect sync, as though it were bound to him, mirroring his every movement. He stumbled, turned, and began to run, his feet pounding against the carpet, his breaths coming fast and shallow. The walls felt like they were closing in, forcing him forward down narrow corridors, around tight corners, each one blending into the last, as if guiding him deeper into the maze. And with every step he could feel it behind him, moving faster, closer, its presence pressing against him like a dark, unyielding force. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows that seemed to reach out for him, twisting, shifting, alive. His vision blurred, his body aching, but he couldn't stop, couldn't slow down. The stalker was right behind him, almost tangible now, its cold gaze fixed on him, pulling him forward, closer and closer. He turned corner after corner, desperate, his mind racing, every instinct screaming for escape. But no matter how far he ran, how many turns he took, it was always there, just a step behind, relentless, unyielding. The walls were closing in, each corridor narrower than the last, twisting, bending, forcing him forward, deeper into the heart of the backrooms. He could feel the stalker's presence, like a weight on his chest, a darkness that seemed to seep into his very bones, cold and unforgiving. And then, just as he felt he couldn't take another step, he saw it. A door. A single, untouched door standing at the end of the hall, its surface smooth and clean, out of place in the decayed, faded corridors. He stumbled forward, barely able to breathe, his heart pounding in his chest, his body numb with exhaustion and fear. The stalker was right behind him, close enough that he could feel its cold breath, its presence pressing against him like a shadow that would never leave. But the door, it was right there, just a few steps away. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the handle, and without a second thought, he pulled it open and stumbled inside. The room was empty, untouched, its walls clean and white, the air still and silent. He closed the door behind him, leaning against it, his body trembling, his breaths coming fast and shallow. For the first time since he'd entered the backrooms, he felt a flicker of relief, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he'd found a way out. But then he heard it. A soft, quiet sound, the click of the door locking behind him. He turned, his heart pounding, but there was no handle on this side, no way out. The room was empty, silent, as though it had been waiting for him all along. And as he stood there, the walls seemed to press in, the silence deeper than ever, filling every corner, every inch of space. He listened, straining to hear, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no whispers, just silence. The last sound he heard was the quiet click of the door, and then nothing. Just an endless, suffocating silence, a reminder of the empty corridors, the lost souls, the stalkers that would continue to haunt the backrooms, waiting for the next one who wandered too far. They say the backrooms are an endless maze, a space that defies logic, where reality itself unravels. And once you've entered, once you've taken that first step into its endless halls, it's as if the walls remember you. They learn your fears, the things you keep hidden, and slowly they bring them to life. That's how it traps you, whispers your own thoughts back to you, until you're not sure where you end and the walls begin. The backrooms, they aren't just empty corridors. They're alive, filled with memories, with echoes of those who've come before, those who've wandered too far, searching for something, or running from something. People have tried to escape, have tried to map its halls to understand its secrets, but in the end they all become part of it, trapped like whispers in the walls, shadows flickering just out of sight, and now he's part of it too. He wanted an escape, an adventure, a story worth telling, and now he's become one of its stories. A shadow lost in the endless maze, a silent echo in the walls, forever wandering, forever searching for a way out that doesn't exist. And the backrooms, they know this. They know him. And they'll keep him there, trapped in the silence, just like they've kept so many others. So, have you ever felt that strange pull? That urge to explore the unknown? To see what's hidden behind closed doors? To step into a place you're not meant to go? The backrooms are waiting for those who wander too far, who don't listen to that voice in their head telling them to turn back. They're an endless, hollow void, a space that shouldn't exist but does. And once you're inside, once you've crossed the threshold, they have a way of making sure you never leave. The backrooms know your fears, your secrets, the things you try to bury deep within. And they have a way of bringing them to life, of twisting them, using them to draw you deeper, until you're lost. A shadow in the endless corridors. Another story for the walls to whisper. It's as if they have a purpose, a mind of their own, waiting for the next one who stumbles in. But maybe you think you're safe. That this is just a story, just a tale meant to scare you. A myth to keep you up at night. But the backrooms, they don't care if you believe. They don't need you to understand. All they need is for you to take that first step, to let curiosity lead you a little too far, to ignore that feeling in the pit of your stomach telling you to turn back. And once you're there, once you've crossed into their world, they'll find a way to keep you. So, if you ever feel that strange pull, That urge to step beyond the boundaries of what you know. Remember this, the backrooms are waiting. They have a way of finding you, of calling out to those who stray too close. And if you think you're safe, if you think it could never happen to you, just wait. Because once you're in, there's no way out.
Hey there! Thank you for venturing into the backrooms with us. If you survived this journey, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest horror stories. Join our community of fearless explorers and never miss a chilling adventure. Remember, the backrooms are always watching, stay safe, and see you in the next nightmare.